The virtual audience is rising, and more than 35 countries are virtually attending this conference. So our next dialogue is about Fast Forward 2030. Will Pakistan's financial sector will deliver? And our moderator and chair for this session is Farrukh H. Khan. He is the Managing Director and CEO of Pakistan Stock Exchange. Farrukh, please join us here. Our panelists are Mr. Atif Bajwa, the President and CEO of Bank Al Falah Limited. Please join us. Yusuf Hussain, the President and CEO of Faisal Bank Limited. Mohsen Nathani, the President and CEO of Habib Metropolitan Bank Limited. My favorite, Shahzad Dada, the all-rounder and the President and CEO of United Bank Limited. This is his first conference as UBL President with us. And last but not the least, our another very dear friend, Maheen Rahman, the CEO of Al Falah Investment Management. And all these six panelists and moderator are member of Corporate Pakistan Group as well. I'm also very grateful to Al Mizan Investment Management for their support with us. Farrukh, over to you.
Hello. Ji, Assalamu alaikum. I think for my sins, I might stand here for this panel. It might make for an easier conversation. So, Assalamu alaikum everyone, and welcome to what I'm sure will be a very interesting panel discussion. I would also like to take this opportunity to congratulate the sponsors and the organizers of this summit, and really for such an excellent conference so far under very challenging circumstances. Pakistan, like many times in its history, is at yet another inflection point, and we heard in the morning session, from the private sector as well as from government ministers, the various challenges that we are facing and how we are proposing to cope with them. And I think as one of the speakers, Dr. Amjad Waheed, said it in so many words in his brief talk, that we are in fact not running out of time, but we need to take urgent action and execute on many of the plans that we have been debating. The good news is that due to the proactive and aggressive fiscal, monetary and social measures taken by the government in response to COVID-19, Pakistan is in fact in a much better position than most other countries in the region. We are currently also going through a significant economic reform process. A robust and well-functioning financial sector is a prerequisite for Pakistan's balanced economic growth, which as Dr. Hafiz also pointed out, that we must have growth, but we must have a balanced growth which is inclusive. Our banking and financial sector has grown considerably in the last couple of decades and has played an important role and part as an engine of economic growth. And we can be justly proud of what has been achieved by the banking sector and our capital markets. Recently, PSX has been the best performing market in Asia and one of the top 5 in the world. And this is excellent. But to be honest, is not quite good enough. Pakistan capital market needs to be and can be much deeper and liquid and larger than it is today. It is one of the oldest markets in Asia, and we have achieved a lot, but we haven't, I think, entirely fulfilled our promise and what we need to do. I would say that it is perhaps the same for the banking sector. Post-nationalization, the banking sector has shown significant progress. However, financial inclusion is still estimated to be around 21% of the population. We have significant financing gaps in many sectors, for example, SME, housing and consumer financing. And all of these are significant gaps which, if not addressed properly and fully, will keep Pakistan from achieving its economic potential. The role and importance of capital markets and the financial sector is perhaps not always fully appreciated. they can and do play a significant role in tackling many of the structural imbalances that have bedeviled Pakistan's economy over the years. The lack of documentation, low savings rate, low investment rates. In fact, I would say that these can only be properly addressed by first developing the banking sector and the capital markets. And these remain the most documented sectors of the economy. So, looking out to 2030, will Pakistan's financial sector deliver? We just had a very interesting discussion before this session, and many of the achievements, particularly in the public-private sector, were highlighted. But to help answer this question that is before the panel, we have an eminent panel with us today. They need no introduction, so I will not take up precious time to introduce them. Information about their formidable achievements are online and in the program. To start with, I would like to, still get some personal insights from all of you. So to start the discussion, I would love to hear what you consider to be an achievement or experience that stands out for you in the development of Pakistan's financial sector from your own sort of personal perspective. It's an open question. Who would like to start? Mahin, should we be?
Sure. Thank you, Farooq. I think so. My experience with Pakistan's financial markets goes back about 12 years now. And I think when I joined this segment, there were perhaps maybe 200,000 investors in the capital markets, and very few, I would say, assets under management as far as the mutual fund industry goes. There was, I would say, a very tiny segment of Pakistan really represented in the capital market space. And a lot of that had to do with the regulatory framework, the way capital markets were perceived in Pakistan, the risk that was associated with them. But I think looking at things now, a decade later, I would say the last 1 year has probably been the most exciting in terms of capital markets actual development and regulatory reform. And that really is, I would say, credit to both the industry as well as the regulator for sitting down together and saying, okay, how can we help the capital markets of Pakistan grow? If we look at the size of the mutual fund industry today, it's about ₹1 trillion. It's ₹1 trillion worth industry, which about 5 years ago was only approximately 500 odd million. So the size has actually doubled in the last 5 years, and almost 40% of that growth has just come in the last 18 months alone. So what really has propelled mutual funds or the mutual fund industry to achieve the ₹1 trillion mark? I think, first of all, the regulation was looked at very closely to see what were the gaps and what were the issues that were preventing mutual funds in Pakistan from becoming an actual capital markets player. And there, a lot of the issues were addressed, whether they related to the expenses that mutual funds take on, whether they related to the risk disclosures that mutual funds had to provide. And in the last year or so, almost the total size of the industry has grown about 45%. And not just that, but we've added on almost 50 to 60,000 new investors into the capital markets. Now, when you look at it from an absolute base of, say, 300,000 investors, 50,000 a year is good progress. But I would say we need to do much more. We need to do more not just on developing the product side of mutual funds, but also talking about the asset side. We have almost 400 funds in the country, but they all invest in more or less the same instruments, which is either PIBs or T-bills or Sukuks or corporate debt that is already available. We need to see how we can expand the different types of assets that are available for mutual funds to pick up, because fundamentally these are the assets that retail investors or that individual investors will be able to participate in. So to that extent, I think I would also give Farooq commendation here, because the last the last major achievement, I think, was the listing of the PS2 Sukuk on the PSX. And that was the first time we have had a market-based pricing mechanism for government issuances. So not only does that reduce the cost of borrowing for the government of Pakistan, but it allows all types of investors, whether they're mutual funds or provident funds or individual investors, to participate in these issues, which were, I would say, previously the domain of just a few institutions. So I think we are seeing excellent development come through. I would say much more needs to happen. One area that we are focusing on the mutual fund side is looking at digital. I know we've heard a lot about digital, but just to give you an example of what we are doing, is last year we signed, we took on the CDC as a partner from the mutual funds platform, which is the central depository company. And they will be launching an online platform exclusively for individual investors, so that this 500,000 or so investor base, which is sitting with the mutual funds, will inshallah move towards the 1 million mark as well. So that is the kind of change that we need to be doing, and we are working towards it. Of course, there's plenty more to be done, but I think the key point here is that in order to raise the overall saving and investment rate of the country, we have to make investment products, such as mutual funds, such as other products, much more accessible to customers, and so their awareness and knowledge will grow exponentially. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahin. Atif, quickly, your personal highlight.
Thank you, Farooq. Just to talk about a few things that have happened over the last decade or so that I think have contributed to the accelerated development of the financial services sector. One, I think, in terms of financial inclusion, was the regulatory framework around branchless banking. And that allowed banks, as well as at that time non-commercial banks, to actually enter this space and really create a network that allowed people to get included in the financial sector more. And that's been developing and progressing further. So that, I think, has been taken on by more and more banking institutions, and that has allowed for the further development of digital products and payment products that I think is going to eventually significantly transform the economy. But we are still we're still scratching the surface on that front. I think the other key piece of regulatory change that has happened in an accelerated manner, as Mahin mentioned, was really this year. And a part of it, of course, was by design, that the government and the regulatory institutions were thinking more progressively. SECP, certainly, State Bank, definitely, and of course, PSX and yourself, you've provided renewed dynamism to that institution and the markets. But within this year, because of COVID, a number of things have gotten accelerated. So one, of course, we've seen as a result of that something that Aurangzeb mentioned, which was the Ehsaas program. So I have to say that, I myself have been impressed, like he mentioned, he has been, that in a country like Pakistan, we managed to, in 1 week, take 12 million customers at the lower end of the strata and deliver to them cash at their own geographies of well over 20 billion. It was me. Sorry.
Somebody wants cash.
It is the State Bank, sir. I guess. So, in 1 week to get cash out to 12 million people out in the rural areas and the very difficult areas, at a time when COVID was restricting people from interacting, and bank staff also from actually getting to their places of work. It's been phenomenal. I think I haven't heard of any other country that's done anything close to that scale. And we hear about the US, where they were trying to get $600 checks to their employees, their population, and were having significant difficulties. So I think this is something that we need to be proud of, and that happened because of regulatory changes, some technology, smart use of technology, and of course,
No, that is a real highlight, I think, that you
Correct.
highlight.
And one other thing that I think we should be proud of this year is the development of digital solutions, and the one that I have in mind is Roshan Digital Account, which is the precursor of many more things to come now. But essentially, the regulation is now there for people anywhere, non-physically, opening up accounts with very minimal documentation or information requirement. So these things, I think, have happened, and I can go into detail, but I think those are the things that will transform the.
We will come back and touch upon the digital and the RDAs and why we Pakistanis living here are excluded from online account opening. But we'll come back and touch upon that. But Shehzad, your sort of personal highlight.
Yeah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, thank you, Afsar, for having us here, and great to be here on this STEAM panel. On a personal note, I would just say, I don't think we celebrate our successes too often. I mean, I remember coming back from the States and we did the first Eurobond, which was, it was a 10-year issue. We did the first 30-year issue. And you have to understand why that's important, because when you have a sovereign issue out there, you can allow corporates to follow, and that becomes the benchmark issue. Anything, anybody, any investor, any FDI coming, they will look at a sovereign issue as a benchmark issue. And I think those were the first ones. We did the first high yield. I remember when I came, we did the first high yield issue. It was us and ABN AMRO. We jointly did a first high yield issue for what was at that time Mobilink, now Jazz. We did the first buyback. So there are a lot of firsts that we have done, and very proud of being associated with that. And all of these required collaboration. All of these required a new mindset, a change. And I think that will be the need of the hour as we move forward. I think this year alone, Marine and Atif touched upon a couple of things, but I think if I just step back, RTGS, branchless banking, I think, having the Omni network, first platform out there at UBL, and what it has done, and what a change factor it is, not to the lives of, with all due respect to the people sitting in this room, but to your, the person living in a gaon or a village getting payments instantaneously in a very efficient and cheap manner. Whether it is RTGS from one corporate, touch of a button, you can send money without banks sitting on it for 10, 15 days, or things, pay order manega, ye hoega, iske paas hai, sarkar ke paas pada hua hai, iske banker ke paas pada hua hai. All of that is gone. Literally, in seconds, things can happen. And most recently, and again, kudos to the regulator and the authorities, we understate NADRA, but what biometric has done, it's a sea change. It's a sea change. Today with biometric, you can go to any of our ATMs without even a card, you can disperse cash. And that can really address a lot of FATF issues and a lot of compliance issues that generally are an excuse that people give. And lastly, as Atif mentioned right now, and what State Bank has done along with the banks in Roshan Digital Accounts, we are extremely, extremely optimistic about it. As UBL, we have been leading the way, and we really think that the future, not just for international, it should also be for domestic. There's no need for anybody to go to a branch and open an account. We can do it instantaneously, and that's what the regulator is working on. It will not only help us get more FDI, it will make the customer experience and the customer's journey a lot more enriching and a lot more effective, so we can really be a lot more efficient in how we move funds from point A to point B. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Mohsin.
Thank you, Farooq, and thank you, Asfar, for organizing this event at a challenging time and having us over here. Just in terms of highlights, I'll touch upon, Farooq, two things. One is I'll go back a few decades first, and then I'll come back to very recent time. In the early 90s to mid-90s, I remember us as I was working then with Citibank and then ABN AMRO. We worked on the inaugural fundraising internationally for our oil companies when the government of Pakistan had some challenges and they needed to access the international markets. I remember we put together initially modest facilities for PSOs and the other public sector entities for oil import. It was the first time it was done in Pakistan. We had I being part of the team and some of the colleagues who worked on this, had to go to investors in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait and Bahrain and Oman, etc., and educate them why we needed this financing. And it was, alhamdulillah, a great success, and subsequently opened the doors for Pakistan to import and finance oil through these structures, especially in times when we had some sovereign debt challenges or cross-border challenges. So I think that was a great experience. And then subsequently, I went on to pursue that career at an international level, but we'll talk about that later on. And then I would say, in terms of the highlights recently, we've seen during the COVID times, the work that the State Bank has done, and all the banks have participated in supporting the cause and the initiative. I must acknowledge that in a period of April to June, and subsequently as well, when the State Bank announced several measures for COVID, particularly the salaries and wages, the deferments, etc., other facilities, about 1.5 trillion rupees was made available to the industry in a very short period of time, very, very short period of time. And I remember us working with the State Bank during Ramzan at 10 p.m., 10:30, 11 o'clock in the night to try and put together these structures in place and make credit available at a very, very critical time. So I think that has really given me a lot of learning and positivity as to how between the regulator and the financial sector, we've been able to support in responding to the challenges during COVID.
Thank you. Yusuf, aapka?
Yeah, so so we spoke about financial inclusion. You said it's 21%. So I think my highlight in terms of the sort of financial development in Pakistan is the development of Islamic banking market. I think there was a survey done by State Bank which said that almost 60 to 70% of the market who don't have bank accounts actually believe that an Islamic bank is not in a close proximity. So I think this growth of Islamic banking and the number of branches that are growing and the kind of products that are being made available to customers, may it be on the corporate front, may it be on the retail front, and more recently on the capital markets front as well. I think this is a beginning of a new business line, an untapped business line, an untapped capital market where there is funding available, there is capital available. So I think the recent development in the last 5 to 10 years, and more so now in the last 2 years or so, I think that would really make a difference going forward. Yeah.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for digging back into the memory lane, but also recent experiences. And it really is, worth, as we stand back and look back, that there have been, so many achievements, and we have, as I said, come a long way. But we do have to go and look forward and see, what are the gaps that we still need to fill. And many people have said to me, not that I believe it, that banking in Pakistan is a simple business. You raise deposits, you invest in low-risk government securities, you make some of the biggest spreads in the region. The share of private sector credit has steadily declined over the years, down from 32% in 2018 down to, I think, about 27% in 2020. So I'll ask about some of the gaps to each of you individually, but I would like you to, has this stopped the banks from really working hard and coming up with new products to fill in some of the gaps we touched upon, the SME sector, agri-financing, mortgage financing, because this is the model that the banks have followed. And Atif, I'd like to start with you. You have one of the leading consumer banking franchises in Pakistan. But we still have only about 1.7 million credit card holders. The average transaction size is only about 5,700 rupees, per transaction. So please share with us your successes and what the challenges that you are facing in expanding the consumer financing base, which is one of the key engines of economic growth in any modern economy.
See, one of my biggest frustrations, I guess, when we internally discuss our business in our business reviews, the performance of consumer banking, is that we haven't achieved scale, the kind of scale that makes these businesses really interesting and profitable over a period of time. And that's because perhaps an issue inside the bank, but primarily the whole industry has not developed. You mentioned 1.7 million credit cards. I remember 15 years ago, it was the same number of credit cards. So in 15 years, we only have about 1.7 million credit cards in a population of 210 million people. So there's obviously something that is not going well. But credit card is one metric. But I have to say that in some of the other areas, there has been progress on personal loans, but again, restricted to primarily the salaried segment. So, I can go on different products, but the essence is that we have not been able to create scale. So what has been the problem? Number one, I don't think we have invested in the human skill set that is necessary to grow these kind of markets. So if you look around, when we go to hire a good consumer banker, we're hard pressed. We don't really get the right kind of talent that you would trust with a large portfolio and in development of different business areas. Number two, I don't think we've invested in the right technology to allow for lower cost of operations of scale businesses. Number three, I think importantly, we have not brought our heads around the risk that needs to be taken in the consumer businesses. So we are very conservative, we're very traditional in our approaches to the kind of risk that we can take on consumer lending. And that comes from the lack of skill set development, and so we continue to have a very corporate mindset as we take risk in SME or in consumer. So these are the three areas that I would say are primarily responsible for us not being able to expand that business in a significant way. Perhaps one can talk about certain regulations that could be tweaked or refined to allow for this area to grow further, but I think those would be, there will always be some areas that can be improved. But I think within the industry, if we were to do a little bit of navel gazing and understand what we have done wrong, I think those are the three areas that I would say.
Thank you, Atif, for that response. And I'd like to bring Shehzad at this point because that also connects to the way digital banking has evolved, and obviously, the technology that Atif was mentioning. UBL was perhaps the first bank to have a digital strategy with your Omni products, and recently, congratulations, you were named the best digital bank in Pakistan. So please share your experience and what your plans are, both not just for yourself, but also how you see digital working out for the financial sector and the banking sector, overall.
Sure. Thanks. Look, for me, and I think for the industry, I think the next, and the title of this, what 2030 will look like, I think it's clearly, there's speed of change is exponential. And if you just step back for a minute, and we say, I'm not saying this with some, just putting it out there, but look at the last 50 years. We've gone through 4 waves, and every time the waves happen, change happen, it's not straight line, it's exponential. And if you look at what happened with mainframes, you had the IBMs of the world, you had the people with white laptop, coats on, going in big mainframe systems. Then we went to computers at home. The second wave was computers at home, Macintosh and all sorts of things. The third was, internet to all people. And most recently, it's all about smartphones. And literally, we have 5 billion people with supercomputers sitting in their hands. But that's going to, and each of these changes happened only in the last 50 years. Most of us were probably here, or probably some of you were not born, but at least I was born, so I'm sharing my age. But that's the change that happened. And I think that level of change is what's going to be coming in our way. And the banks that are able to adapt to it and be able to understand that change. And use technology as an enabler, I think will be the successful organizations, because our customers' demands are changing. I think what the customer wants, it's going to be a lot more competitive. You will have to be a lot more innovative in your thinking. And again, it will be an autonomous experience. You don't have to necessarily, as I was saying earlier, you'll have to go to a branch. Some of you may prefer to sometimes go to a branch, but it will be a sort of a hybrid model. Again, hybrid these days is being used quite a lot for different things, so I'll be careful there also. But it will be a hybrid model, and I think for that, banks have to gear up today, because if they don't gear up, the customer's demands and what the customers want will really put you behind. And therefore, it's very important that we continue to invest in it, understand what the needs of our customers are, and how do we ensure that we have the right platform. It will all be a platform-based solutions rather than product-based solutions. And I think all these things that we are talking about, which have been challenging, can really be augmented with using technology as an enabler. And I think what we saw during this last 9 months is a lot of our customers who are very resistant or reluctant to adopt to digital solutions were immediately, because of the crisis that was caused, were able to adapt. And I think all of a sudden, on all banks here, all of our digital onboarding shows a step change in the onboarding. And I hope that journey continues, because I think that will really allow us not only to serve our existing customers much more efficiently, much more efficiently and competitively, but it will allow us to bring the remaining customers that you talked about that are not here. And I think it's again a mindset that, oh, the guy living in a gown doesn't use a smartphone. I mean, we'll be all surprised the way that whole world is changing. TikTok has the largest consumer base in Pakistan, one of the largest consumer base, and most of that is rural Pakistan. For a bank that's sitting in 45% of our branches are sitting in rural Pakistan, I can tell you, hand on heart, the technology advancements are a lot further along than we think.
Thank you. That's really interesting, and I guess that will also allow banks to cope successfully with challenges from fintech companies, etc. But just to change tack for a minute, we heard in the last session also, and all the announcements and the measures that have been announced for the construction sector and the Naya Pakistan affordable housing initiatives that are ongoing. The role of the banks will be critical in providing housing financing. And so far, as we've seen, the mortgage financing industry in Pakistan is quite underdeveloped. I believe, in a lot of the countries, and I think Atif, you were mentioning this, that mortgage financing is up to 100% of GDP. In Pakistan, it's less than 1%. So, Yusuf, would you like to share how banks are planning to bridge this challenge and to really be able to provide the financing that's needed for the success of the housing and construction sector?
Thank you, Farooq. I think, first of all, let's see that what is the ground reality. So actually, the mortgages are about 0.5% of our GDP at this point in time, compared to India, where it is about 10%, and compared to the Western world, where it is more than 50% in most of the countries. Okay? So first of all, I think we must establish as a country that it has a great potential to contribute towards the overall economy of the country. So it can actually be an economic booster, and I think this government is realizing it, and the State Bank is definitely realizing it. So what have been the impediments in terms of the growth of this sector? I think the first impediment has been the foreclosure law. And it has recently been resolved. It was decided by the Supreme Court. The jury is out there in terms of the successful implementation, in terms of the repossession. There is lack of real estate regulatory authority in Pakistan, which really basically takes care of the rights of the consumers, the individuals, and also puts out a framework for the real estate developers as well. So that's not there. So these and NPL ratios of the bank, historically speaking, have been about 10%. The total market size is about 104 billion rupees only. with only 60,000, 70,000 mortgage customers out of a population of 210, 20 million people. So really the sector deserves some attention. So now what is happening? What is happening? The State Bank has actually taken on this initiative. They have formed a committee of a few banks. NAFTA has come into existence. So NAFTA is primarily focusing on the low-cost housing, and they're putting a framework around this entire housing structure as well. So there has been cooperation between the capital providers, which are the banks, the regulatory authority, which is NAFTA, and State Bank as well. So there is concerted effort that is being put out in terms of putting in the right model. So decision on foreclosure law is the first step towards that. Then NAFTA itself is trying to bring in a few projects. Then there is this entire discussion on the developers financing. So even if I want to take a mortgage today, on the supply side, there is dearth of the houses. So there is a demand of about 10 to 11 million houses in the country. So making that capital available, the central bank has put 5% of the total loan book as a requirement for each bank, which basically means that about 250, 260 billion rupees is going to be made available in 2021 only. So I think these are all welcome steps. So this sector needs to be addressed as an industry, both on the developer side and on the mortgage side as well. So I'm very confident that with all the regulators being involved on this side, this sector in the next few years is going to really take off. And I think one of the most important things has been the consumer scorecard development. I mean, Atif is leading that effort, and the central bank is pushing all of us to collaborate with each other and develop those credit scorecards, generally for the housing sector and also for the overall consumer finance sector. So I'm very hopeful that this sector for the banks and for the country is actually going to be a major contributor in the next 5 to 10 years.
That is really great to hear, because it is so important for Pakistan's economic growth and also for equitable economic growth, because everyone doesn't have that access to be able to buy their homes on cash. So it is really critical as we look at balanced growth. So SMEs are the backbones of any economy, and Metro Bank is one of the leaders in SME financing in Pakistan. PSX has recently launched a GEM board, a growth equity market board, where SMEs can come, enlist and raise capital. With the regulations are much easier, the cost of raising capital is much easier. So we hope that we'll be able to collaborate with many of the banks. But Mohsin, please share your experience and strategy, how you have successfully financed SMEs. It is a challenging sector, but as I said, critical because it's the backbone of our economy.
So thank you, Farooq. And as you rightly said, that the SMEs are the backbone of any economy. And if you look at it globally, whether you look at the developed markets or whether you look at the successful developing markets, in each of those markets, the SME segment has played a very, very critical role. Absolutely critical role. They contribute directly to the GDP, they contribute to employment, they contribute to taxation. So I think it's fair to start by saying that for any economy, including a place like Pakistan, the SME segment has to be nurtured and supported and allowed to grow. Now, having said that, it's much easier said than done. This is one of the most challenging and difficult sectors to nurture and grow. And I'm not talking about only in the context of Pakistan, but even other countries which have had a successful SME growth model. Because typically these are smaller players, they have less financial resources, they have less transparency, they hardly have access to capital, they don't really have good access to export markets. So the challenges are huge. Now, despite the challenges, you will see that many of the nations have been able to put their arms around this challenge because they realize the importance of growth of the segment and provided a lot of support to the SME segment. And I think that's where we need as a country, and when I say we, I mean everyone, whether it's the government, whether it's the regulator, whether it's the banking industry, we will all need to really make a concerted effort to support the SME segment. And it's not easy. As I said, in Pakistan, even in the morning when the minister was speaking about the legal system is weak, which is one of the biggest impediments towards lending. Now, we have seen at Habib Metro, alhamdulillah, we have a very good share in this business, mainly because I think a couple of decades ago, there was vision and a view taken that we want to play in this space, and a very good client base was formed. Having said that, the access still remains very difficult. Even today, when we come across new names, because of the challenges that I just talked about, it's not easy for banks to step up. And Farooq talked about the decrease in private sector lending, which is actually true. So I think we need to create an enabling environment around this, whether it's the government or the regulator coming forward with an enhanced risk guarantee structure, some level of incentives on the taxes, on the subsidies. There are various measures that have to be taken. And I think until we allow and support access of capital and financing to this sector, it's going to be very difficult to grow. Now, obviously, the risks are there, but we'll have to provide a structure around this. I think recently during COVID, the State Bank has done a lot. They've come up with subsidized financing. They've also come up with a partial risk guarantee covering up to 40%, which is a wonderful support system. And I can tell you, if that support was not there, the outcome would have been very different for some of these, or a lot of these SME players. So, Farooq, I would just conclude by saying that I think at a national level, there is a need to put greater focus and attention. And somebody, I think in the chain, if the government talks about organizing this, I think there should be some senior level involvement at a senior ministry level, which works closely with the regulator and the banks to see how we can support the sector more. It's only when we are able to unlock the potential of this sector, you will see that our manufacturing base will grow, our exports will grow, our employment will grow. And in the absence of that, it'll always be a slow growth process that we will go through.
Absolutely, you're right. Thank you,
Permission, can I just say a few things, just endorsing what Mohsin is saying? Look, we've talked about this, it's a very critical sector and all the things that Mohsin was touching upon, but again, linking it to digital. I think it's the whole ecosystem. Using this crisis, what we saw, a lot of people had no choice but to come into the banking system because they could not do transactions. And I think when we connect all of this, it will create more inclusion, it will get more documentation, but we need to give them some breathing room. So this is where I think, again, a private-public partnership, which was being talked about, how we can collaborate all together. Because let's also, I mean, Habib Metro has done a fantastic job, but this sector has serious NPL issues. I mean, people say, why don't you lend to medium-sized businesses or small businesses? I was doing a business review, and again, looking at some industry side, this sector has gone from 30% NPL. Now, no business, even with the margins that we are talking about, can survive that. 30% of your portfolio has issues. And again, that number has been slightly reduced because of the subsidies that have, because of some of the deferrals. So again, if we really want to make it sustainable, we want to make it long-lasting, we really want to bring them in, I think to do a step change, I think a digital inclusion strategy will really allow them, because you'll connect the ecosystem. When a Unilever is buying from a distributor who's buying from a Karyana store or selling to a Karyana store, you can get everything documented, and then, this whole, one, you will benefit from a tax to GDP point of view, you'll get more taxes, and you will allow more transparency, so we can really get the real books under which we can lend, and there's no hiding income and defaulting on loans. Thanks.
You're absolutely right that this issue of documentation is critical, and as we move ahead and with these developments taking place, I hope that will improve, because without that, all kinds of developments are held back. So Maheen, turning to you as the only non-banker and bringing much needed diversity to the panel, you touched upon your experience of the mutual fund industry. Now in a lot of the countries, mutual fund assets are larger than banking sector deposits. We are far from there. So how is the industry, the mutual fund industry looking at this challenge? And also, I would like you to touch upon, and Atif is welcome to contribute, Al-Falah is one of the few groups that has banking, asset management, brokerage within the same group. And then UBL also has asset management and insurance. But we've seen that all these sectors, or the important sectors of the financial industry, are really working in silos. So what has been your experience, and how can we accelerate closer working and cross-selling?
Okay, thank you for that question. Is this on? Yes. Okay, so I mean, as the only non-banker here on this very esteemed panel, I would say that when I look at the way financial institutions work in Pakistan, the key reality is that anyone, any individual, any corporate would like to take the least amount of risk for the highest amount of return. And with the government being the biggest borrower in the market, we see that unfortunately a lot of the capital that banks generate or even mutual funds generate ends up going towards the government. Now that may seem to be fair in the context of the risk-reward calculation, but it does cause issues within the system. In particular, it causes distortions within the system. And perhaps what I can use here is an example of pension liabilities that are being built up both in terms of the government sector as well as the private sector. Now, when you have the availability of risk-free returns, then it is automatic to assume that pension fund managers will choose to park everything into that lowest possible element of risk. And on an annual basis, that might be the best way to go. But when you look at it from the context of decades of building up that risk-free return without actually understanding what is the required amount that you need to pay out at the end of the year to someone's pension, you end up with a massive unfunded liability gap. And I think that's an area that we as mutual funds are looking to explore in greater detail. Because while the government may be one of the largest pension fund asset managers out there, the reality is that the unfunded liability that has to go into that pension pocket is now in the hundreds of billions of rupees. And without a clear asset-based, market-based, risk-assessed way of investing, that liability can potentially never be covered. So, it is our encouragement towards the government, and this is somewhere where the fund industry wants to also get involved, is how do we address that unfunded liability, and how do we generate market-based ways of saving that can help close that liability gap. I think the other area that mutual funds are looking at is infrastructure funding. I think that's something that we've talked about housing and we've talked about the mortgage market, etc. But this is also something which mutual funds and the fund industry as a whole can look at in terms of infrastructure funds that look at project financing, that look at debt financing, that look at housing financing as well. So for there, I think the regulations are actually already in place, and the industry needs to take a step forward and begin to assess that risk, because not only is it a different type of fund, it is a different type of investor that will end up in the fund. So I think lots of areas to look at and to explore, but I think the key point here is that calculated risk and return are going to be fundamental if we are going to begin to close some of the funding gaps that exist within the financial institutions today. As far as Al-Falah goes, I think I will let Atif talk a little bit more about that. But as far as the investment management company goes, we have certainly incorporated ourselves into significant synergy with Bank Al-Falah, both on the branch banking side, the wealth management side, as well as on the digital side. I think we realize that synergy is what will keep the group customer base with the full cross-sell ability of the banking teams as well as the asset management teams, so that we provide a complete suite of products to all our customers, whether they end up on the lending side, on the banking side, on the asset management or the brokerage side. The idea is that customer base must have access to all types of products. And I think I'll let Atif add more to that concept.
Thank you. I think you've covered in the last part the main kind of strategy and objective that Al-Falah as a group has, which is essentially, if you were to to try to bucket the needs of customers in 4 different quadrants. It's number one, transactional. You need to deposit money, you need to remove money, you want to make payments, you need to import stuff. All that is transactional. And second piece is where you need to borrow money for growth or for investment, so you can have debt to be provided, or you can have access to equity markets. The third piece is where people have money to invest and grow their wealth. So that's the third big bucket. And the fourth one is when you have these assets, you have to have protection also. So protection is the insurance piece. So as a group, we've tried to look at the needs of the customers and say, okay, how do we do that? So we do that with the bank, which covers big pieces of these buckets. And then we have the asset management company, which covers the investment and growth piece. We have the insurance company that covers the protection part. And we have the brokerage piece, which can give you access to the capital markets and allow you to transact as well. So, given that strategy, we have a view that we are going to continue to invest in these businesses and make sure that they are more integrated to give a seamless, wide range of products and services to the customer base. So that's...
Thank you. Thank you. I know we're running late, but we can open for a couple of questions from the audience and then do some closing statements. Are there any questions for the panel? Otherwise, I have lots of questions. Sure. Could we have the mic there, please?
What you guys are doing for startups means many startups are worried to get payments online, fintech, online payment gateways. We don't have any payment gateway for our websites. We have too many problems with getting the APIs with EasyPaisa and JazzCash, and there is a lot of documentation for that. So any roadmap for helping the startups to get payment gateways on their applications and websites? Thank you.
That's really important, and even the broader financing gaps that are there, the VC industry, the PE industry, we haven't even touched upon them. That whole ecosystem is absent. But payment gateways specifically, who would like to answer that?
I mean, I would, after this meeting, love to hear what exactly is your problem, but I think, look, this is an important sector, and I think the regulator, State Bank, also recognizing that, has recently eased some of the regulations to adhere to the needs of the customers. So I think there's a lot going on. I think this is a recognition that there could be a sizable amount of foreign exchange that could also come through that. And integrating them, when you say APIs, integrating your fintechs into our platforms? Yeah. Well, look, that will also depend on what fintechs. We are running a core banking. Each bank has its own core banking system, and again, we all have to be careful, because while we've talked about a lot of, at least I've talked a lot about digital, there's another element to it, and that's security, and making sure that whatever we do, we are not compromising the security. So I think that can be done. A lot of that is already happening. Again, we would encourage that. Future, if we get a chance, we'll talk about it, but that's more platform-based. There you will need to have this ability to integrate with different fintechs. And we also are realizing there's not, all banks can't do everything themselves. They'll need partnerships, they'll need alliances, they'll need collaboration, and I think we will need to continue to build our platform such that it's able to be versatile and flexible enough to integrate with you where required.
You one more question there. He's just bringing the microphone to you.
Sir, my query is regarding the new Pakistan scheme, which you're talking about, the housing schemes. So what incentive basically banks are getting out of it? All banks are getting the same incentives by supporting this project, or the banks get different incentive for this project, sir?
So it's a standardized sort of subsidy that the government is giving. It's up to 5 million rupees for low-cost housing only. And the intent really is to support people who cannot otherwise afford a house. So it's like, it should ideally be like 15,000 rupees, 18,000 rupees max on a monthly basis for a 20-year loan facility. The problem on that side is the availability. Because, I mean, while you have certain pockets where such houses may be available, but on the development side, it will take some time. So while the government has given that subsidy and it is being utilized by people, but the real takeoff probably would take another maybe few months, 6 months or so, when the availability is going to be there. And the risk taking is primarily done by the banks, both on the developer side, whereby they take a project risk, and on the takeout side, where the project risk is ultimately going to be taken out through mortgage loans to the end users. So the subsidy has been given on the end user side, and that is pretty standard for all the banks.
And just for your...
If I can just add, the subsidy is not for the banks. The subsidy is for the end borrower. So the people who borrow at subsidized rate is for them. And the structure is standard for all the entire banking industry. The only thing that the banks have is that there is at the tier 1, which is the lowest tier, there is a partial risk guarantee that is being provided for a portfolio coverage to the banks, which is there for everyone at the standard level. So there's no other subsidy that the banks are getting.
Last question, anyone else before we move to the closing? Ji? Achal, from there. Thank you.
Hello? Hello? Hi, this question's for anyone that wants to answer. Banks primarily invest in government bonds and securities. Are banks going to increase their risk appetite in the future, or are they going to restrict themselves to, just investing in T-bills and PIBs, which, like Maheen said, kind of does crowd out the private sector?
G. I think, to be honest, that the banks have taken lots of steps, and we've been seeing in many of their answers. But Shahzad, would you like to expand further?
Shahzad has passed the buck on to me.
Or Atif, sorry.
But I think first of all, you have to understand that banks invest in assets that are available to invest in. And the fact is that the government borrows a lot in this country, more so in most other countries, and they give you a return which, as was pointed out earlier, is theoretically low risk because it's government guaranteed, and the returns are reasonable. So for any rational commercial entity like a bank, you would invest in those, but it depends on what the total base of your deposits are, so that you can decide how much to invest in government securities and how much to give to the private sector. And you're right, the decision is how much risk appetite do you have to invest in the private sector. But also, it's not only the risk appetite, but there has to be also sufficient and significant demand. So it's a balance. How much risk do you take and how much demand there is? And so as commercial beings, we are constantly balancing that risk. So part of the reason why the banking sector is in this situation where everybody blames it for not lending and also only giving money to the government is because the commercials are in favor of taking low risk and getting a high return. We have to move away from that, but the government also has to play an important role and possibly reduce its borrowing and maybe the returns come down. So from a banking perspective, I mean, I can tell you from our perspective, we would like to get into the private sector. We want to be into real banking activity, which is to promote the economy by supporting our customers, which are, not only corporates, but SMEs, agriculture, individuals. We'd like to be supporting that as much as possible. The entire ecosystem also has to come around to supporting that level of lending or activity. And so it was mentioned earlier that foreclosure laws don't help, some regulations don't help, some degree of the lack of documentation doesn't help. So all those are challenges that banks have to overcome to try to then take this significantly higher risk in lending to the private sector. But, I think strategically, that is a direction in which most banks would want to go into.
Thank you, Atif. So we'll come. I know there is so much more to discuss, and we've already had a very rich discussion, but we are running out of time. So just to close the discussion, one thing which I was talking recently to the head of a large, Pakistani business group, and he said that the lack of management talent is a real constraint on their growth. Now in Pakistan, traditionally foreign banks have been a training ground for bankers, and mashallah, all of you have had outstanding careers with the international banks. So as you go through your closing comments, would love to hear what are the Pakistani banks now doing to train the next generation of bankers, and when will we see a president of a large bank who is completely homegrown? So maybe, Yusuf, you could start from there, and also any closing thoughts on the discussion we've had so far.
I think there are basically two types of development programs that are going on. And there is this technical development program, which really supports digital banking and all those sort of technology-oriented projects. So the banks are really focusing on that. Plus, I think the induction programs that the banks are running now for the younger lot are much more comprehensive, and they do sort of take into account the kind of future potential that the banks have. So these are all management trainee programs which really offer you a long-term career. So I think the realization absolutely is there that you cannot get talent from each other now, because since most of the foreign banks are not existent in Pakistan, so you have to actually develop the talent from within. So most of the banks, for sure Faisal Bank, but most of the other banks, I believe, are also putting in time and effort. So I think it's only a question of time, then you will see improvement in terms of the homegrown talent within the local banks.
Sure. The reason I want to push on this is 2030 is not so far off. And Atif, as you mentioned, last 15 years, consumer financing, you gave as an example, has been constrained because you haven't had sufficient talent also. That was one of the points that you highlighted. Now we've identified so many of the gaps: SMEs, mortgage financing, consumer, just to name a few. And to grow all of those areas, you need a really deep bench to be able to do that. So, Mohsin?
I think just to add on to what Yusuf is saying, I'll be brief on that point. I think the local banks are now investing heavily in training people. Whether it's in 5 years or 10 years, you will see that the next generation of senior leadership in the banking industry will be homegrown and from local banks. For a variety of reasons, I think our generation would have retired in the next 10 years or less or thereabouts. And I think a lot of the banks, local banks, larger banks in particular, who invested heavily in training earlier on, have made those investments. So I'm quite confident that you will see that breed coming out. The concluding comment that I would like to make is that whilst when we get together in these forums, we talk about a lot of our challenges, I think we should also recognize that the overall banking industry in Pakistan, compared to a lot of the other markets, is one of the most stable and successful industries as well. I think the regulatory regime is strong, the regulatory framework is very good. The regulators do a very good job. And if you look at the bank's general health, across the board, you will see the banks are very healthy with relatively lower ADR ratios from a liquidity point of view, high capitalization. And I think in terms of COVID, the way between the partnership between the government and the regulator and the banks have responded, we should recognize and celebrate that as well. So we shouldn't just have a doom and gloom scenario. I think the industry has done well and is in a very good position, whether it's going to be through the digital play or Roshan accounts that we're establishing, and the whole housing finance sector. Housing finance sector, the banks will only lend 5%, but look at the overall benefit it will create in the across 25, 30 industries. So I think there's a lot of good stuff that is happening. Finance Minister advisor also talked about some of these things. We must keep sight of our successes as well.
No, absolutely. And some of the successes that you all shared at the opening were really, were outstanding. Shahzad, any closing thoughts or on this?
No, I think a lot has been touched upon, and in interest of time, all I will say, look, things are changing, and things are changing not just in Pakistan. Globally, things are changing, and technology is playing a very important part. And banking is also changing because our consumers' demands are changing and what they want. And we need to, leading banks, I think, will be the ones that will really become the trusted interface for life for those consumers. Will be able to not just for their professional needs, but for their personal needs, really be trusted upon. And I think we need to really embed that, embed banking within the customer's lifestyle, both at a personal level and at a lifestyle level and at a personal level. And I also believe one of the things, and this has been said, so it's a bit of a cliche, data is to the 21st century what oil was to the 20th century. And data is going to play a very, very important role in banks and for customers' journeys. I think banks, customers will expect that the data that they've given to you once can be used, reusable, and can be used effectively to really determine what their needs are, rather than trying to sell them something they don't need. And I think we all are enriched with a lot of valuable quality data, and I think data mining and utilizing that is going to be very important. A flip side of that is that with protecting that data and that comfort them getting that they can trust us, and the security of that data will be very important. So banks, I think if you ask me, one of the emerging risks will be cybersecurity. I think that's something that we all will need to become very good at, because otherwise you lose your, the trust that's really important in that customer institution relationship. Customers will demand frictionless transactions, safe, secured, and they would want to make sure that they are most cost effective and automated. They want anytime, any place, anywhere. And things have to come from a simpler, better, faster. If you're not simpler, if you're not better, if you're not faster, we are going to be dinosaurs. So if banks do not do that, I think we will be the net losers, because there is a whole array of other service providers that can really come and fill this. This cannot be taken as, and therefore I think a lot of things that I talked about, the fifth wave of changes that are happening, will become very mainstream. But having said that, I think that human touch will remain quite important. It's not going to go away, especially in the next 10 years. Ye nahi hoega ke there will be no branches. But I think that the ability for customer to choose and go back and forth or have that hybrid solution will be very important. And lastly, I think, mentioned earlier, I think we need to move away from this product-centric, try to take products and stuff it down customers' throat. We need to become platform-based. We need to integrate best technologies, best solutions from our other partners, whether it's fintechs, whether it's telecom companies, whether it's other service providers, and integrate them so we can really give them a seamless solutions on that base. So I would just encourage all of us to be wary of that, because it's really happening very fast, and frankly, it's happening at a very fast pace. And we need to, on that note, I would say we have some great talent here. We need to groom that, because that will become a very key ingredient in the success of a banking institution. And that talent, luckily, we have a lot of in Pakistan, and we need to continue to groom that. Thanks.
Thank you, Shahzad. Atif, any closing thoughts?
I think, I guess in a way, re-emphasizing what has already been said, but I mean, clearly, we're talking about the future, 2030, and we have to recognize that's increasingly going to be dependent on the quality of human resource that can take us through this transition. And the more traditional mindsets will have to be either evolved or completely changed. And so your earlier point about emphasizing training and development of people is absolutely critical, and I think banks need to spend more time and stop thinking of this as an expense and start thinking of it as an investment into the future. The other piece is to bring in into the board discussions and shareholder discussions the need for innovation and changing our model of operating. We've talked about it enough, how behaviors are changing and how technology is going to be used. I'll just use an example of what's happening in one of the banks in the Middle East. I was informed that they have reduced the number of branches by 33%, and they have, of the remaining branches, only 20% are actually going to be manned branches. So the rest of the branches are going to be driven by automation and digital technology. So we're far from that. In Pakistan, we're actually opening more and more branches and have that physical contact. Perhaps it's because of the nature of our customer base, but I think there has to be a lot more that we need to do. We need to invest in the digital capabilities in our branches to be able to drive transactions to digital platforms. We have to work with the technology providers. As has been said, banks are big buyers and users of technology, but they're not necessarily great innovators of technology. So we have to partner with technology firms. And the way to do that, each bank has a different model. But really, you have to find that connection and work with them, both on using their technology, but also providing them the capital for investment and growth. So that's a key piece.
Thank you.
The last part that perhaps I would like to say is this, for the first time this year, at least my impression is that regulators are coming around to supporting an ecosystem development. So on the housing side, we've spoken about NAFTA and State Bank pushing it. We've spoken about Russian digital account. We know that a number of other initiatives are being taken. So the first time we're actually seeing more happening, and perhaps that's filling up our plates a little bit too much. We're in constant conversations with the State Bank, but that gives me hope that the acceleration of the pace of change can take place now. So if out of 50 million customers, as just one metric to use, only 8.5 million people use mobile applications. And that too, using mobile application is very loosely defined as using it once in 90 days. So, there's so much more that has to happen.
Absolutely.
So I think there's hope for much more, but we're still scratching the surface.
Thank you, Adil. Mahin, any closing thoughts?
Sure. So the average Pakistani is 21, 22 years old, looking to graduate college or getting into some vocational training program. We have to make sure we can capture that job market by providing capital to firms who are either hiring or then who are either training. So in 5 years, where does that individual end up? In 5 years, they probably want to buy a car. Do we have the ability to capture them in that model? Yes, there is a subsect of that will end up with the car financing, but most likely they will also look at alternative streams. So is crowdfunding an option in Pakistan? Is that something we have fully explored? Are those the kind of startups that we should be partnering with to ensure we don't miss the boat on that front? In another 5 years, that individual hits 32, 33, wants to raise a family, wants to buy a house. Do we have the platforms necessary to enable that? At the moment, we are talking about Naya Pakistan housing, we are talking about affordable housing, but will they really come to the mortgage market? Is that something we have to make easier in order for people to access that? Or again, will they look at alternative streams, which may in another decade or so be coming out? And so on and so forth through the life cycle of the consumer in Pakistan. We are going to have to be far more nimble in terms of addressing customer needs and financing needs. And as the fund industry, in terms of exploring other avenues of capital raising that we need to bring to businesses here. In Pakistan, we miss the entire VC space. We miss the entire private equity space. Only now are people beginning to talk about private equity options of funding businesses that eventually will provide that employment. So it's important that we continue to work with the government, the regulator, and the industry to make sure that the regulations work and that we come up with something that actually suits the end customer. Otherwise, they will continue to look at informal means of funding rather than being included in the financial space. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahin. We are completely out of time, so I will just close by thanking the panel for a very rich and thought-provoking discussion. I think it's clear to us that over the last few decades, Pakistan's banking sector, Pakistan's capital markets have come a long way, but there is a lot that needs to be done. There are significant gaps that we need to fill, and these are exciting times. And I think going into 2030, it's going to be exciting. Whatever happens, it's going to be extremely exciting. And inshallah, when we have this conference in about a decade, we will look back and celebrate some of the other successes that the panel highlighted. But we have our work cut out for us. We are lagging behind in many spheres, and we all have to work together and hopefully break the silos between the different parts of the financial sector, banking, capital markets, insurance we haven't even touched upon, so that we can all push together for the growth of Pakistan's economy and equitable economic growth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Farrukh. Thanks to all the panelists, Mr. Atif Bajwa, Shahzad Dada, Yusuf Hussain, Mohsen Nathani, Mahin Rahman, and our moderator, Farrukh Khan, for the brilliant discussion.